in a slightly different way. I'm going to handle the introductions, and then I'm going to mainly turn a lot of this discussion over to John Warniak from SEMA. He's going to help me out quite a bit. So our first guest, well, she was an intern way back when with the National Speedway Directory and actually helped us behind the scenes put this show on. And like many in the racing business, she also started out as a racer, having been a very successful karter until the money ran out and reality set in. But as good as she was on the track, she's become even better behind the scenes. The communications coordinator for Sunday Management. Let's welcome Maddie Komar.
Hi.
Maddie, tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you said, I started karting, and college came around, and I was like, I got to think realistically here. So I always said I did college backwards because I kind of knew where I wanted to end up, so I needed to find a major to kind of get me there. So I did a ton of internships during college and racing and worked abroad. I worked with someone in Austria. I worked actually with Chris Aylett in London too. And so kind of brought me to where I am now. And I work for Sunday Group Management, which is a PR agency. We do PR for all sorts of racing teams and race series. So I kind of have hands in all types of motorsports right now. Currently, I work with Michael Schenk Racing in IMSA, and I also work with the Conti team, Team TGM, and then we do series, so like MX-5 Cup, Porsche GT3 Cup, so a bunch of things. So kind of living out my dream.
Let's hear it for Maddie. Our next guest is celebrating over 30 years in broadcasting. He has covered it all. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's a kind of racing that you haven't described in one way or the other, but you also have perfect attendance here at the Racetrack Business Conference. 7 years as a panelist here. And quite frankly, Ralph, I'm not so sure we'd make it to 7 years without help from good folks like yourself that have supported this and bought in on this idea of an educational seminar on the business of speed. He's also part of the team that saved Chris Economaki's old brand. So from Speed Sport and Turn 3 Media, it's Ralph Shaheen. Say a few words to the folks, Ralph.
Well, after 7 years, I think I have to save a few. I don't know if I have anything left for anybody that wants to hear from me. Thank you for having me back, and it's great to see so many old friends, young old friends, of course. Yep. This will be my 31st year on national TV when we throw the green flag sometime in 2019. So that's pretty remarkable to me that I've made it that far. So Speed Sport and Sprint Car Midget are the two big passions these days at Turn 3 Media, as we're off and running with those and producing about 30 different TV shows this past year for MAV TV and CBS Sportsnet. Website, speedsport.com, is going great. All those different platforms that we have that we'll be talking about as we probably get into our media discussion a little later. But great to be back and great to see so many of you here at PRI again.
For Ralph. It also seems a bit ironic that our next guest spent a great deal of his career working with old school racing, both at USAC, at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and now he's on the cutting edge of this esports marketing revolution from Charge Sports. It's Ken Unger.
Thanks, Dennis. I like the old school reference. But I really excited to be here. This, not only this conference, but this show is pretty much the only convention that we have as an industry. So it's great to see friends, young old friends, and friends from many years. 22 years ago, I started in motorsports. I should say I stumbled into motorsports, and I've been stumbling ever since. But it's great to be here. Hope we have fun. Hope we're provocative, as John has mandated. Thanks for the invitation.
Our next go. Let's hear it for Ken. Our next guest is the only person in RTBC history that got upset when I told him that being on a panel at RTBC was not rocket science, because he's also probably the only one in the room that understands rocket science. Another strong supporter of the Racetrack Business Conference from SEMA, and a man who gave me my absolute best nickname in the business of Dr. D. It's John Warniak.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Thanks. Glad to be here. And by the way, the D isn't for Dennis. For those of you in Southern California, maybe some of you old enough to remember Dr. Demento. That is, close your eyes, say a few words, Dennis, and that is Dr. Demento.
I can't believe that.
Yeah, that is him. That is, isn't that him? Yeah, Bo Bachman and Dennis have the same voice. They're better than the real Dr. Dementos.
I want to bring that show back, you know.
You got to put a top hat on? Look like
yeah, I'm willing to do anything to make a buck nowadays. All righty. John, I'm going to actually utilize you because you guys started a great discussion at SEMA, and we're going to kind of continue it here about the future of racing. Tech versus performance. Which is most important to the manufacturers? Which is more important to the fans?
That's a good point. What is most important? And again, we want to hear from you a little bit later in the Q&A session, but the discussion we want to start here on the panel, the technology, the performance, and marketing as a platform. And you said what's important, particularly to the automakers and what I'll call the network suppliers, the Densos, the Asians, the ZFs, et cetera, that are out there. Valuable, important, or maybe most importantly, what's relevant to the automakers and suppliers of using racing as a technology or a marketing platform. Anybody want to start?
I'll start.
Sure, Maddie.
So I think that obviously I'm very young, so it's hard for me. I know what's going on now, and I hear about things in the past about how technology and marketing tended to be like two very separate entities and didn't really merge together. And from what I see now being in the industry is they're very cohesive, and I think that they kind of run off of one of each other. So people in the industry who I work closely with, who work for manufacturers, they have meetings with engineers and marketers together to kind of see how they can market a car, but through the motorsports industry, and obviously that takes fans. So engineers tend to see the technological side, but through a marketer's eyes, you kind of have to explain that to the fan in basic terms.
Yeah, and I would think like Chris Myers from Charge Motorsports, eCharge in my head, talked about that. I think the technology is much more appropriate to marketing than it is to the vehicles today. I mean, you look at what I'll call automotive 4.0 or automobility 4.0, EVs, electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, AVs. We know where the automakers are going. Look at their investments, billions. They're short of Formula E and Robocar. There are no other racing 4.0 venues out there. Where is the technology platform and some of the things you may be seeing and some of the things you see, Ralph, the technology as well as the marketing technology?
Well, I was going to say it might be a good thing that there's not a lot of other race sanctioning bodies for that. I'm going to take the other side of this conversation just for fun. I think you have technology, and instead of the marketing side, let's put it entertainment. Let's take it as the entertainment side of the sport. And what's more important? Is it the growth of the technology side, or as an industry, do we need the entertainment side of the business, the sport, to be super successful? Which one is going to draw the fans back? Now, I've been a part of Formula E as a broadcaster for Fox Sports, so I've seen it up close, personal, and very quiet, which it is. And as a broadcaster, I've been to things like American Flat Track and World of Outlaw sprint car races. And those are pretty still basic, bare bones to what they've always been. The format, the formula of those forms of racing has not changed greatly over time. Maybe they've made some improvements in shocks and tires and what have you, but it's not a massive leap forward like we've seen in Formula E, for example, or Robocar. Where are all the fans? Not at Brooklyn at Formula E, I can tell you because I've been there. It's a different crowd. It's not a racing crowd. It's the crowd from Lower Manhattan. It's the crowd of people who are involved in investing into that technology. It's stockbrokers and people that influence money changing hands on Wall Street. I went to Brooklyn for the first race. I was there all weekend. I didn't see an Eldora shirt anywhere. There wasn't one.
And
Well,
every
maybe
time,
in my
every time there was
suitcase.
dirt on the track, they wiped it off.
Yeah, right. There might have been one in my suitcase, but there wasn't one on any fan in the grandstand, I can tell you that. Now, their emotion club, as they call it, $1,200 a ticket, real fancy hospitality tent thing over there, couldn't get in. All those people came over on ferries from Lower Manhattan. They had all kinds of star celebrities there hanging out in the emotion club. All those same people that you hear about that are going green and pushing green. What's the guy from Titanic?
Capriano
Oh, I got a story about DiCaprio. I'll tell you guys
was there
later.
all weekend.
He was there, and it'll be in my book somewhere. And it'll take a whole chapter, and you're going to love it. Trust me. But anyway, in January, most of us are going to be in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Chili Bowl. It'll be wall-to-wall people with Knoxville shirts on, and Eldora shirts, and Boone, Iowa shirts, and wherever else you get, Bob Sargent's places. There'll be a lot of shirts from his races around there. That's where the race fans are going. They want entertainment. We just did a big cover story on this in Speed Sport. You know, what's more interesting, the show or, you know, the quality of the racing? And I think that's, for this room, if we're trying to draw race fans back, they're way more interested in that than they are in a robo-car or an electric vehicle. That doesn't mean the industry as manufacturers, I understand what they're interested in, but that's a little bit different than the core race fan, I think.
Ken, esports is driven by technology. What can us in the racing world learn about how they're using technology? And this is a sport that's basically been built on social media platforms.
Yeah,
How can we learn from their success and utilize some of those same technological tools?
I think I want to merge that question into what Ralph said, because I think what you said was really important. And I actually take it back to how we started. When you talk about technology, the car, and the fan, that word relevance is really important. But then you have to ask relevant to who? And the one thing that I think we need to be mindful of, and I think of just looking around this room, when you say race fan, that means a lot of different things, because there's a lot of forms. What I've learned is that there are a lot of forms of racing, each of which have their unique fan. And so whether it's at the Chili Bowl, or whether it's at the Indy 500, or whether it's at the Formula E event in Brooklyn, they're all different, and what's relevant to them is different. Just like what's relevant to each manufacturer is different. The beef that I have, and in terms of technology, and I'll bring it back to esports, is that in the sport today, and I mean all forms, there's a disconnect between what's relevant to the manufacturers and what's relevant to the fans. And there's no attempt to reconcile that. And I think we're seeing that in the data, because I don't really think and I don't want to be the gloomy Gus, because I think I start off by saying I've spent half my adult life in racing. It's a sport and an industry that I love, but it's not expanding. At the very best, we're holding our own, and I think we can expand it again, but it's by embracing what's relevant in technology to each of these groups and serving them. No matter what customer that is, no matter how we define that race fan, we have to serve them by being relevant. That includes to the manufacturer. What Chris Myers from our agency said during the esports segment is they have really defined what's relevant to that segment. I mean, if you are from Gen Z or a millennial, say anywhere from age 16 to say age 34, esports from a technology perspective, what the lifestyle represents, what the entertainment form is, how it's relevant to your life and the experience, it's super relevant, which is why they have about 25% growth year over year. This industry has to do that again, and it's by embracing what technology means and making it relevant to each of those groups.
And that's a good point to jump off on with the embracing or engaging. To realize where Formula E and where some of the connected autonomous and automated driving is going, you got to getting our time machines to go back to 1910, when everybody coming to the racetrack business conference back then, Ralph, you were here, so came here on a horse and buggy. And literally, there's this new thing called a car that they're going to race. That started with Henry Ford on the Ice Lake on Detroit River in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. People didn't know where that was going to go. People don't know where Racing 4.0 is going to go. But I think it's sessions like this that bring that out, and I think the biggest thing driving that, Ralph touched on it with the fans. Yeah, the Chili Bowl fan is out there, but I think every generation defines what is cool to them through their life experiences. And the fans have changed. Their lifestyles have changed because of all those things we have in our pocket called a smartphone. Certainly have changed because of the demographics, the urbanization. Certainly have changed because of the psychographics, what their expectations are for the fusion of sport, entertainment, and technology.
Well, and to what Ken was talking about, what he's doing with esports might be one of the most important things going forward for all of our youth. I have a 12-year-old son. And that might be the best thing I've got going for me right now to figure out what I need to know. We were headed to a Panthers game over the weekend, and I had him all alone in the car for about half an hour, and I put the phone down. I got to grill you on a few questions. And I started to ask him, okay, what do you like about this sport? What about that sport? What's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? And he kind of gave me that 12-year-old perspective of the sports world and how they get ingrained on things. First two and the most important things in a 12-year-old boy's world right now are Madden and NBA 2K. Drives everything. Madden and NBA 2K, video games. Those two video games. I said, what about Fortnite and all this other stuff? Everybody goes, they're just, here now, gone tomorrow. Madden and NBA 2K. He goes, it drives everything. He goes, everybody learns about the sports that way. They understand everything to how the games are played. Then we go outside and we do it. We play the plays that we see. I know the defenses. I know the offenses. I know the shots. And I want to do that, and I want to be that guy. And then I want that guy's jersey, and I want to watch him on Sunday, and I want him on my fantasy team. Okay. So why not NASCAR? Well, they don't have any of that, for one. And the other thing he said was highlights. And I thought this was really interesting. He said he's got all of the different sports places, ESPN, Bleacher Report, all that, wired into his phone, and that thing is beeping all the time. So-and-so just scored. Such and such just won. This guy just got traded. Right? He's following all that. He says, I can get up in the morning, and while I'm having breakfast, I can turn on the phone, and I can go through all the highlights of all the games from the night before that I couldn't see because I had to go to bed because I got to get up for school. But I can watch Carolina play Duke, and I can see a minute and a half of really cool highlights. Great shots, big action, this happened, that happened, and then I know who won. I said, well, what about the cup race from wherever he goes? Because it's not that exciting in highlight form. And he said, you take a 1.5 mile racetrack. He says, I love the road courses, I love the short tracks, and then I'll take the super speedways. He goes, those 1.5 mile tracks bore me to death. He said, it all looks the same, they all look the same, and everything just continues on. He goes, when you get to those big tracks, he goes, yeah, you get a crash every now and then, and the restarts are fun. He said, but then I got to just wait. So my highlight of that is maybe two things, and there's a checkered flag. The NFL game, when we have that one, it was the Chiefs and the Rams. It was 55 to 52 or whatever. He couldn't get enough of that. He could not get enough of that. All offense, all day, that phone was just glowing with highlights. And he was eating it up, right? So there you go. So that brings up two things. What they're doing with the esports stuff is great because now maybe kids that don't necessarily have an interest in cars just yet might try out a racing game in esports and get interested in racing one way or another, whether they dream of going to Formula One or at least to a dirt track, or maybe their first experience is going to be at their local racetrack because they can't find an IndyCar event yet, right? So maybe we get them started that way. But then the other thing is that he was talking about is, maybe if he can't find good highlights at the big tracks, with the NASCAR stuff or any other series that, in his opinion, drones on, they go for something that has a lot of action like that. That's what they're after.
You address watching a Formula One race?
He did not.
No, how about you?
Me. Well, see, now this is where the problem becomes. Do we really care what I think anymore? Right? And the reason why I say that is because we really need to worry about the 12-year-old.
We need your son here.
We need, and all kidding aside.
There's your speaker for
no,
next
all
year.
kidding aside. And one of the reasons why I did that was because I knew I was coming here. I figured if I can't get Lucas here, I can at least pass some of this information along. Some of you know my kid. He's actually, must obviously take after his mother. He's got some thoughts. But he's pretty tuned into this stuff because he's been around Dad enough. He's come to enough of the events. He's gone to all these races and sporting events. He's seen it. He's been exposed. He can make up his own mind on this stuff. And he will, with the Formula One stuff, for example, I'll ask him, hey, what do you think of that car? Oh, that's really cool. Or what about this one over here? Well, that's all right, you know. And it's what he thinks that matters most, right? Now, I'll just give you guys a quick synopsis of the way he thinks about that stuff. And my daughter, who's 15, is pretty much the same way. So this works for both sides. And they've been everywhere with me. Motorcycle races, can't get enough. Want to go every time. Whether it's on pavement, dirt, going over jumps, or around in circles. They're fast, changes all the time, tons of action. One of their favorite events, World Finals at Charlotte. 3 big cool classes of cars, different cars coming out on the racetrack every 10 seconds. There's another group. There's another group. All great racing. All the cars look different, bright colors, cool stuff, sliding around the dirt track. Love it. Stuff like that. Knoxville Nationals, really enjoy it. Big events like an Indy 500, oh yeah, sure, because it's a big event, right? So a Formula One race, he would probably come and sit down and watch it for a little while because I've made him, hey, look, this is Monaco. Come sit here and watch this. This is important. I got to tell you why. And he'll watch, and he'll get it, and he thinks Ferraris are cool, and then he's, off to something else. But just to give you a broad perspective of this kid, he was also a judge recently at a concours and had a great time doing it because he was able to be a judge and had to be immersed into the process.
What if their dad was not a racer, was in this industry? This is the biggest competition I see out there.
Or the biggest help.
Anybody address this?
It's the biggest problem or the biggest help, and that's why what Ken's doing with the esports stuff can help bridge that potential problem there.
Well, I mean, I like your question. Like your 12-year-old son, I think Maddie's the closest we have to a 12-year-old here. So, Maddie, what's your perspective on Formula One? I mean, you grew up with a cell phone probably, right?
Yeah, so I'm in that bracket where, admittedly, I'm on my phone 24/7. I get all of my news from Twitter. Everything is on social media. And going back to the Formula One thing, more so on the watching it on TV. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I think it's the most boring racing you could ever watch compared to other racing out there. I mean, when passes are made through the pit stops, that's not racing to me.
You ever watched the Formula
Yes, so where I've
One? Ever watched paint dry?
yes. But I think that some areas where Formula One is, I can see them trying to make an effort, is when the Halo started. So the Halo on TV, on the camera screen, if you notice, is like indirect view of the camera when you're on and on board. So they made I don't know if you noticed, but they have like the throttle and the brake that covers the Halo. It's like a TV graphic, and they're putting graphics up there so that you could see where the driver's getting on the gas and where there's like statistics on it. And actually, I just was reading something that I think came out yesterday or this week, but Formula One is partnering with Amazon and like a SageMaker graphic. And basically what they're doing is they're attempting to put more TV graphics on the screen, which I think is helpful because people want to know what's going on, and anything at this point will make the racing more exciting. And so what these graphics will have is tire wear. I mean, there's like 50,000 tires at Formula One, like ultra soft, super soft, hyper soft, you can't follow it. So this graphic will show you like this is where the heat transfer is on this tire, and they think they have the tire. They have overtake probability, so there'll be a graphic that will show you the probability of someone passing versus, like, based off of stats of how that person performed in a corner. And then lastly, I think they're going to do pit stop to anticipate when someone's going to do a pit stop and what they'll do in the pit stop. So I see efforts being made to kind of make it more interesting and to educate somebody who might not be a full Formula One fan, but it helps.
I'd like at that question too, and I don't mean to pick on our friends at IndyCar because they're literally my brothers and sisters, but this is the most important invention of our lifetime, of our generation, and it's changing the way not only we do business but the way we live. So the IndyCar of today is based on the 1979 Chaparral 2K. What did this look like in 1979? And that's true. We can go across the board in motorsports and have the same and ask the same question. And so the question I pose to the leadership of every sanctioning body is, what are you doing to make your product more like this and not like a bag phone, which didn't even exist in 1979, right? So that the disconnect between our industry and this, just from a metaphor perspective, is one of the most important things getting back to relevance.
Okay, real quick to that, Dennis. Just to put a period on that. Okay, and again, I'm just for the fun of the conversation, I'm going to take the other side of this. Lucas doesn't know what a bag phone is. Couldn't care less. He knows the Rams and the Chiefs went 53-52, and his phone was full of highlights.
54-51.
Okay, 54-51. I know it was in the 50s, and it was an amazing game, right? So my point is, all of that technology that Matty was talking about that the Formula One guys are putting on the screen is great. It's really cool, and it's very interesting to people who are really into that. None of that translates to 54-51 on a phone. It's in highlight form.
One of the big divisions that I see that we're dealing with, and I want to get a feel for if it's something we can tackle or whether it's something we just have to adapt and ride this evolutionary wave. Guys my age and John's age and almost Ralph's age, we fell in love with motorsports because we loved the car. Now I see people falling in love with a car because of the technology it has. Are we just looking at, is it impossible to get people excited about the cars, and should we be doing more about getting, except for World of Outlaws, they're still
If the car becomes more like your phone, they do get excited about it. Why do they line up to get the iPhone XS and pay $1,000 for a phone? Because it does things for them. People don't buy your products. They buy what your products do for them. And they're as loyal to that phone as they are to any car or anything else they have until the next one comes out. And then they'll gladly trade it in for the next version of whatever that is. And basically they want to be in something that they can stay distracted if they like, or take friends in something that can be distracted and get there safely if they're going to a race. But they want it all, and their expectations are way higher than anybody would ever think. And they demand it in their cars. And that's what I'll call a new way of cool, if you will. When the performance era started, PRI show, SEMA show, even CES to a degree, basically that started, and what made it cool was bringing that to the consumers. Yes, we have fans. And for every fan, a multiplier of 1,000 for a consumer. We have to market to consumers. The fans don't need any marketing to. They are the biggest advocates for the racetrack, for the automakers, for the suppliers. Those are the people that are your advocates, your evangelists. Those are the people that go out there and really spread the word to the consumers. They're the go-to people for everything that we're talking about here.
And that's what John is saying is exactly what we're seeing in the trends from a marketing perspective, in that the work that we do with auto manufacturers, it's true that the baby boomers, Gen X, to a certain extent, are the last generations that look at cars as something uniquely special. And we have a relationship with our cars. The generations, Gen Z and the millennials, view it as commodity appliances. So to John's point, the more technology that's laden into these cars, the more they view it as something different than a car. Because right now, they'd rather hail an Uber than get their license. And we're seeing that in the trends, and the manufacturers are really struggling to adjust to this. The average age of first car ownership is getting older. All these things that are not good for the auto industry, well, we have to look at, as the motorsports industry, the first word in auto racing is auto. So when cars are autonomous, as they will be in the next 15 years or so, as cars are electric, which 2/3 of most of the fleets will be electric by 2030. What does it mean to have a car in auto racing? And again, it's a lot of it's going to be about technology, as John said.
You will not be today. You cannot go to any OEM in the world and get approval for an internal gas combustion engine. So if you have your cars, or you're a hobbyist or a racer, go out here in the shop floor tomorrow and buy all the crate engines you can. Because they are 2030. I realize it's 12 years off, but that's in a heartbeat. That's only 2 vehicle product development cycles. 2030 is the tipping point.
Are we looking at another great divide, though? Because there's 2 things that pay for motorsports. There's fans, and there's the manufacturers or the companies involved in the sport. Are we seeing a divide bigger than ever between what works for the manufacturers to test and innovate their product and what the fans still want? Listening to Chris at lunchtime kind of spawned this idea, because he's talking about, the manufacturers are big in the hybrids, they're big into the electric. Sometimes as fans just want to see a lot of belching smoke.
Exactly. I think Scott Atherton made this great comment at the SEMA show. He said, if you think racing's expensive now, wait till hybridization and electrification become mandatory, like in WC. That was just mandated. And Formula One, the technical sterility, for technology's sake. No, not a divide between the fan and what the technology players and automakers are doing. A true disconnect. Not even a divide. I don't know how we scan that chasm. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I know, like, my generation, the way that I look at things is I don't see a divide. I think that people who grew up with traditional racing are the ones that see the divide, because it's just such a new product that they kind of don't know how to take it. But the way that I view it is it's this awesome new thing, and we just need to teach these people who are into traditional racing that this is going to be really cool. So people around my age and younger, honestly, they're going to be the ones buying electric cars. They are the ones manufacturers are going to be targeting. So I think if anything, the bond is going to be stronger between manufacturer and consumer, just because of where the growth is going. It's easy when you're used to motors and V8 engines and the smell of gas, and to be like, yeah, there's this huge divide, but I see it kind of the opposite, actually.
yeah, if you ask Jim Hackett or Mary Barr at GM, they say we have to go where the fan is going. And they're going electrification, they're going hybrids. That's where they want to go. But racing has to be there before the fans and enthusiasts get there as well.
Question for John. When you say 2030 is the tipping point, how do you mean? Is that basically based on the consideration that you're considering just the U.S. market alone, or?
Tipping point is typically crossing the chasm, is the phrase. Basically, when any segment, any market, whether it's automotive or electronics or whatever, esports reaches 16%, that's when you go from the early adopters to the mass market. So that will be 16% of EVs.
The early adopters vary depending on the region as well. So it's what am I?
Oh, Europe is way ahead of the United States when it comes to that.
Yeah, basically,
Yeah,
it would not apply to anywhere else outside of the United States, what you just said.
Oh, whole world, globally. But some will get there faster than 2030. 2030 is the tipping point for U.S. But some of the cities in Europe that have already outlawed gas combustion engines, diesels particularly.
Yeah, but then we also still have the Asian and African markets, which are pretty much still way back behind. Right? So.
Oh yeah.
We're going to go to the young lady in the back.
It's difficult for me to sit and listen to this long conversation about the future of racing. whatever type of racing it is and whatever type of vehicle we might be racing, I hope at least that all of our lifetimes here that there'll still be human beings. The human factor of the future of our sport is still a big part of it, and you guys haven't even brought it up. I mean, I think of every sport. I mean, your son, Ralph, I mean, it's not just the team, it's some of the players on the team, so they kind of still care about the human factor. Whether it's baseball, whatever sport it is, people care about people. I don't necessarily, particularly if we're going to try to bring new fans in, whether there's an electric motor in that's running the car. I think speed and some of the things like the numbers, can get them excited. But please don't forget the human factor, and whether it's the race car drivers, which obviously it sounds like I would be promoting that as who I am and what I do, but whether it's the engineers, the people, I think that is not an element that we need to, to demise or overlook. I mean, and it's the hardest part because you've got race teams that you don't know how long those drivers are going to be there, so how do you invest in those? When you have team owners that are making those decisions, well, the same thing happens in football and all of the other sports as well. I mean, we are moving targets, but I just think that human factor should be an important part of the success of the future of the sport.
I don't know if this will make you feel any better, Lynn, but let's go back to the Madden and the NBA 2K and the difference between when I would have been playing football at his age and to him doing it now. One of the things that's interesting with these kids, and we'll see how it translates into racing, when they play these video games, let's take an Odell Beckham Jr., for example, because everybody's seen the rise of him as a football player to superstar status. A lot of that came from what he did on the field, and then the kids playing as him on their version of Madden, and then I want him in my fantasy team over here. So Lucas, who grew up as a Carolina Panthers fan, can't stand the New York Giants, but wanted an OBJ jersey. I never would have done that. As a kid who grew up as a 49er fan, there is no way I would have worn a jersey from a team. I don't care who the player was or how good they were. It's my guys and that's it. These kids have gotten to a point where they've connected to athletes because of how they are on the field, and then they have them on their fantasy team and they have them in their Madden game, so they respect them in a different way as an athlete and want to interact with them in a marketing fashion or through social media. He follows all these guys individually on social media, so he has that connection that you're talking about to that athlete. He still has his favorite team. He's not cheering for the Giants, but he respects OBJ. So he'll do the same thing with racers. He'll find certain guys that he might relate to for whatever reason, whether it's a Donnie Schatz or a Ryan Dungey or whatever it might be. So I don't think they've lost that connection to the athlete yet, and I still think the human interest side of all sports, no matter what it is, whether it's figure skating, boxing, whatever it might be, that human interest story is one of the reasons why the Olympics are still such a big deal, is because you're watching this athletic competition, but you've been hearing all about the human side of these athletes that are competing, which connects you to why you want to watch the gold medal round of fencing. You could care less about fencing, but all of a sudden I've heard this story about this athlete, and I got to see if this person completes their journey. So I think that is still there.
Years ago, I adopted a media coaching client that had been working with someone in the Charlotte area, teaching everybody to speak the way the NASCAR speak is. And it was like undoing problems because they didn't want personalities. But if we don't have personalities, we don't have a future of racing. It is the personality that got me to cheer for Buddy Baker back in the day. It was the personality that got me to cheer on Mark Martin. Two very different personalities, but those were my guys because they excited me because they were real. Too often I see with whether it's the manufacturers that are putting the big money on these athletes at the higher level, you see a Hinch come along in IndyCar and everybody loves him. And you see that, but you see so many shy away from showing their personality now.
Well, I think Lynn brings up a good point, so do you. And Ken, you've talked about this before, the point of heroes versus celebrities. We've got a lot of, and racing was built on celebrities. Some achieved the status of heroes. Where are those heroes going to be and where they come from? Maddie, you had a
I think 80%, if not more, of my job is to create stories around drivers. Like I said, I work with Meyershank Racing directly all year in the IMSA season, and we have a lot of really famous drivers, and people want you to feel like they know you and that we recognize you, and that when they come to our trailer during the race weekend, we'll say, hey, I remember you from social media. Shank has these insane super fans that have been following the team for 10 plus years, and they come in and we offer them a drink and all this stuff, but creating stories around these drivers is really what drives fans to want to come see you. We have Catherine Legg for an example, and she doesn't even need a story, but still, like, the fact that these drivers are tangible, that's another Formula One issue. Drivers are not tangible. You cannot go shake their hand. They're surrounded by 100 people. But with IMSA, you can come into our trailer, you can say hi, do whatever. We have autograph sessions where you can chat with them for 2 seconds. And it's just making drivers available to fans to make them feel like they're a part of our story.
Real quick, what happens when the drivers go away from the possibility of the advent of autonomous vehicles? That is coming. It's coming in line with EV. It's going to become less and less cars on the street. Manufacturers are going to produce less and less drivable cars, which produces less and less cars on the racetrack. And I know the transition is going to happen to where we have where racetracks become the only place eventually you can drive a car. What happens at that point? That's my biggest concern about the human element. I think it's coming just as fast as 2030 with less and less people even being off the street in a car or being able to buy a car.
I think that's a great question. And I think the answer is, it depends. And the reason why I think that is, if what Lynn said and what Maddie said is, if you get back into the hero creation business, which we don't have today, and if we are really, really good again at storytelling, which we're not today, then having people, the human, drive the car on the racetrack is going to be very relevant. But the flip side about that is, who has seen drone racing?
TRL.
It's pretty cool. Especially if you see with we talked about VR and such. It's pretty cool. Auto racing could become that. So it really depends who's right and what we do. One of the reasons I wanted to be on this panel is the people in this room are influential in what happens in auto racing. It's not just the people who own the sanctioning bodies and such and the racetracks. It is every racetrack represented here, every business represented here, every sponsor represented here will have an impact in that decision. So it really is, it depends, but it's going to change our industry one way or another.
Can I ask one more question?
No, go ahead.
So you follow the money. Where's the manufacturers going to go? They're going to follow the money, and the money is going to be in autonomous vehicles. That's where I think it's going to go. Even if we do a great fanfare, we have fantastic social media, fantastic marketing, that is the big question mark. So if these manufacturers are just creating autonomous vehicles, because an autonomous vehicle with an autonomous vehicle play well, human-powered vehicle with autonomous vehicle play poorly, they're going to start making that universe where you can drive human-powered cars, smaller.
Absolutely. It's going to cost you a hell of a lot to drive, because if you have an autonomous vehicle, even now with connected systems and automated system, ADAS, Advanced Driver Assist, you'll get a reduction on your insurance premium. And they're moving towards that. It's just going to cost you more. What's really good for the racetrack business owners here, if you digitize your track, I guarantee you every OEM, every network supplier will want to come to your track and test their autonomous vehicles at your track. One, because of the environment, if you have snow, rain, whatever it may be, hot, cold, whatever, they want to be there, and it's called geofencing. So if you digitize your track for some of the esports opportunities, to put on your Oculus goggles and go around that track, like Thunder Hill, and digitize it, every OEM is going to want to come there and test their cars. It's going to take them 8.8 billion miles to get to what they call level 4 autonomy. That's impossible. It's going to take 504 years to get to that. So they got to test at tracks. Some of them are doing it out on public roads, but again, 8.8 billion miles, you can't get there. So that's a great opportunity. And you're doing it at Thunder Hill. You have the self-racing once a month. There's 40 people that show up for that. And they're NVIDIA. Companies like NVIDIA. They have 1 foot in today, 1 foot tomorrow. One's in autonomy, one's in gaming. Those are your new players.
I want to digress back to something that Matty said. I'm a sprint car guy, so the idea of an autonomous sprint car I can't just get on it. But Matty said something about your phone, Matty, and all the information and the data you have on your phone. And it made me think about, I spend every weekend in race control with all of the information available in the paddock. And these races have become exciting to me. I came from the sprint car world where they're 4 wide, and now I really love IndyCar racing because I can understand what's happening. So my thought process has always been, you got to give that to the fans, but how do you get the fans engaged in that? And Zach reminded me of the WEC thing, where you can do the fan boost. I'd be curious to hear what your thought is on that. And then Ralph, based upon, if you can speak for your son, is that viable here in other forms?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to like the driver thing, where you want people to feel like they're a part, they're having some effect on our journey. Formula E, I'm going to go back to it. It's taking me some time to get used to, but I love what they're doing to engage people, to make them feel like they're doing something. So they have the fan boost thing as well, where you vote and you're literally changing the race. You're giving somebody an extra boost. Like, that was your doing. That was nobody else's doing. And I think that really intrigues people. And then also going back to the new Formula One graphics that they're kind of playing with. If you can get those on your phone, that's like so much information that people feel like as if you're sitting in race control or you're sitting in the pit box, you're getting that right in front of you. I think that they can find ways that you can engage with that. Like, if you were to change your tires on the phone, like, what would this be doing at this track? I mean, there's endless possibilities, and I think we are headed down that route because it's all about engagement and engaging people to make them feel like they're making a difference, essentially. So by giving people information, we're on the right track to helping them engage.
And back to you, David, what you were saying there, I think all of what we're saying here is pretty interesting, and I think there can be room for both, right? We can have autonomous, and we can have robocar, and we can have all this high-tech stuff in Formula One and IndyCar and World Endurance and World Rally and all the areas where that transitions and translates well. We can still have the Chili Bowl and the Knoxville Nationals over here. Even though you got all this really crazy high-tech over here and EDM concerts, Rolling Stones are coming back and everybody's buying tickets. Those guys are 70 years old. But they're just playing straight-up rock and roll and everybody wants to hear it again. So there's nothing wrong with a fire-breathing, belching, smoking sprint car around Terre Haute. Who wants to go tonight? I'm in.
Hey, Woodstock is coming back this August 15th.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I'll be there.
My point is, I think that even when you get all this high-tech stuff, which is great, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with it, and please don't think that everything else I was saying means I don't like all that stuff. There's cool things about it, and it's definitely coming down the pipeline, and we're not going to be able to stop it. But what can you do around it? You can find a way to adjust to it, and obviously Dave's done that with Thunderhill, and what John was just talking about is a fantastic idea, and every track owner should listen real clearly to what he just said. But at the same time, people are still buying magazines, thank God, and listening to reading books and playing with vinyl records and doing all that. So some of that old school, if you will, raw, is still, people are not going to want to stop with that. You still need texture, and you need to feel things, you need to smell things, and you need them to stir passion inside you. And quiet race cars don't do that.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit because I think that times are going to change, and right now we're in a really good spot where you can kind of get the best of both worlds. If you like racing, there's plenty to that, and it's only growing. And if you like traditional racing, that's there too. But there's gonna come a point in time where sprint car racing, for example, the technology might not be there anymore because we're in an industry where everything is going electronic. So what is that series gonna do to alter how they keep their fans are gonna eventually disappear because the world is gonna be taken over by electric. So how they're gonna have to make some alteration to interest people because that eventually that fan base is gonna dwindle down. I mean, I think it might be hard right now for people to hear, but that's where the generation is going, and I kind of look at it from a different point of view.
Your age category, a lot of us are old timers, we love motorsport, okay? What I'm seeing and talking to kids today, they don't care about cars. They don't even want to own a car. They go to Uber, they're on their phones all the time. The question's going to be, what are they going to think of gas guzzlers? That's what they think. They think race cars are gas guzzlers, okay? And we're not socially conscious about that. How do you address that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that to a point. Like, I'm kind of in the middle where I do appreciate, like, engines and loud cars, and I'm still not used to the no-sound Formula E car. But I really understand that generation, that's what they want. Like, they are going to want an electric car, an autonomous car, or a self-driving car where you can get behind the wheel and text on your phone while your car is driving for you, essentially. Like, that's what people want, and I know it seems so ridiculous, but that's where it's...
And a little rebuttal from the noisy motorsports department.
No. Ain't gonna happen. You know the Chevrolet motor that we see so much? When was that first designed?
1958.
1958. Still going strong today. John could tell you, we were just at the SEMA show. Aisles and aisles of cool things that you put in your mirrors and cameras. But what people and cars that are on display were those gas guzzling, horrible cars that this millennial group think is so terrible. One of the most popular displays out there was the Hot Wheels display, which was all these old cars from way back when. So back to what's going to happen to sprint car racing. First of all, we don't use gas. So I guess we're off the hook there, right? But as much as we want to believe that e-racing and batteries and everything is going to be the future, the past shows us what we're going to be able to watch in the future. And that's when we see exciting racing, when you see side by side. The general sprint car, the stock car, they've not changed in 50 years. And they're not going to change in 50 years because we think batteries are the new future. There's a million other reasons why batteries are going to have trouble taking over our highways, let alone the taxes and the gas stations and all the other issues that come along. Maybe it'll be 2030. I'll be dead by then. Won't matter. But I'll be going to a sprint car race in 2029, I can tell you that.
And it won't be electric.
Last question in the back.
Hey, Dennis, just, one thing I wanted to add to that, too, is that I do all the Supercross races. And I see maybe the youngest race fans there are out there every Saturday. And, yeah, they're super tech savvy, and they've all got the latest whiz-bang phones, and they know more about social media than I could ever imagine. But they still love playing with dirt bikes, and they can't get enough of it. And a dirt bike is as raw a vehicle as a sprint car or a midget or anything else we're talking about. So, yeah, maybe the pickup truck that they're utilizing to get to where they go ride their dirt bike is high-tech and is different and is burning crazy fuel or whatever it might be, or is a hybrid, but they're dreaming about that dirt bike in the back. So I don't disagree with what Maddie is saying, that there is this change on the way to what the younger generation wants. And maybe that pickup truck is going to drive them to Castillo Ranch with, you know, some crazy GPS thing while the guy's texting social media stuff. But when he gets there, he still wants to kickstart that dirt bike and go jump that thing. And that's the raw part of that belching sprint car that I was talking about that never goes away. Okay, I don't like EDM music, but I stand there at the top of the pagoda at Indy and I look over at that EDM festival over there and I'm watching it. I'm not really hearing it because I'm more tuned into the race cars, but I remember standing there with Mike Zizzo from Texas Motor Speedway. I'm sure many of you know Ziz. And the two of us are standing there looking over there, and the music was different, but it was still that Rolling Stones concert. There was crazy lights, the music was really loud, and there's pyro going off. I loved every bit of that except for the music, right? So they're really doing, the music might have changed, but they're doing the same thing. It's the same things that are attracting them when they get there in a lot of ways, I think.
You know, that's a good point, because these are the good old days. Today, because we have choice. We have both. Number one vehicle at the LA Auto Show last week. What was it? Number one vehicle. Rivian was one. Second one was the Jeep Gladiator. As old school as you can get. Put a Hemi in it, and better yet, the Elephant. Yeah, right. Put the 1,000 horsepower, put the Hellcat motor in there, they'll clamor to it. But Rivian, the electric SUV, and the Gladiator. So this is the best time to be in this industry.
Final question in the back.
Bill Straley. I'm with CRS Super Trucks. I think there's, sitting and listening to a lot of things today, there's an elephant that hasn't even been discussed when it comes to talking about the future of racing that I know is probably on a lot of people's mind, but it might not be appropriate for discussion, but we got to look at something. And it's not only our sport, but even in football. And it's the safety. Safety is a major factor, but in the virtual world, there's no real consequences. You can reset it, reset your game, start all over. But I think we're losing a lot of fans sometimes by going too far. When do we go too far? Part of our sport that attracts people, and let's face reality, one of the most attended sports now in our sport is crash-oramas, things of this nature, because of the danger, like you said, the rawness of it. As we take some of that away, I think we're losing a lot, because now it's kind of like in football, the quarterback. There's so many rules to protect that quarterback, and I know you hear it all the time. It's not football anymore, and even with our sport, there comes a time where if you take that rawness away, you know. But we got to live in the fact that there is what we do in our sport. The reality of what could happen. So I think that's one of the issues in the virtual world. The reality is a little different. So when do we have to realize that you got to leave some of the dangers inherent? That's what attracts the people.
I think technology nowadays, I think that there's ways where you can improve safety without sacrificing performance and entertainment. And I mean, just the Halo, for example, that does absolutely nothing to how fast they're going. So I think that there are ways where you can improve safety. And in my opinion, I'm a huge safety nerd. I'm a racer at heart, and I understand that racing and driving is a very dangerous sport. And when you get into it, you know that you could die at any moment, basically. But when I read articles about, I think it was Lewis Hamilton or something, but they don't want safety because they've accepted the fact that the inevitable can happen. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I think if you had the choice of this person dying on Sunday or them not, you would never choose purposefully. So I think we can improve safety measures without kind of sacrificing a ton of performance. But
well, I wear my Hans device, and I wear my Tech 10 Alpine Star boots and a helmet when I do video.
All right, guys. As usual, the discussion just goes off in crazy ways, but I think we learned a lot today. Ken, final thoughts.
I think one of the themes and one of the kind of takeaways would be relevant to your customer no matter who they are. That's how we'll save our sport.
Ralph, final thought.
I thought this was. I thought there's a lot of interesting stuff here today, and I think what was pointed out was that it's coming, change is here, and there's going to be more coming. It doesn't necessarily mean the end of the industry. You just might have to, like David has done at Thunder Hill, find ways to adjust a little bit. And even if you're doing something that is more traditional and more raw, doesn't mean you're going to become a dinosaur. Just means maybe you need to kind of look a little bit as to how you promote to your fans and show them that raw is fun too.
Maddie, final thought.
Yeah, I think just being open to change. I think that my generation is a little more open to change and trying new things and seeing what the future holds. But I think that if everybody was just a little open, I think really good things are coming. And also just my background, it's all about the fans. So just making the fan the number one priority.
John, take us home.
Not a final thought, but a final question to all of you. Does all this disruption, this uncertainty that's happening, make you uneasy? Some yes, some no. Well, it's better to be uneasy than extinct. So embrace it. It's going to happen. But the point is, it's going to coexist with everything else we've been talking about. Technology doesn't disrupt the old technologies totally. We still have print, right? We still have digital. There's both. Cars did not replace the airplane. We still got other things going on. We will coexist, and we'll find ways to continue. And the racing industry is at the forefront, the gemba of all that development.
What did we learn from our panelists? Well, the highlight reel mentality drives your younger fan, but I got news for you, folks. It drives the old guys like me, too, because it might be an iPhone 4 because I'm cheap, but this is where I get all my news now. Number 2, connecting with fans on their devices will be the key to the future. It doesn't matter what we're racing. The key is to connect with the fans where they are watching and listening to content. But number 3, great comment by our racer in the back. Young lady's I think she's got quite a future in this sport. Let's not forget that the racers are our heroes. I have never, ever seen a fan cheer on a transmission part. Let's give these folks a great round of applause.